student retention and throughput in general is a difficult matter. Combine that with postgraduate and distance education, it becomes even more complicated. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Sondlo, who is going to talk about student retention and throughput in a postgraduate distance education program, a South African case study.
What time is it? Good afternoon, colleagues. I just realized that it's now 12 o'clock, which is midday. Good afternoon to you. My presentation actually is on student retention and throughput in a postgraduate program, a South African case of distance education. I actually drew this from my MEd because I was actually interested in finding out the strategies that are being used by institutions, that is higher education institutions, in improving their throughput rates. So I actually looked at 2 institutions. I interrogated their strategies, and I actually went on collecting data. I was on the field. I wrote up my report on that, and I would like to share my findings with you. This is how my presentation is actually structured. I'm not going to talk to everything. You can see exactly for yourself because of time. Okay. As we are aware, we have a challenge of access in higher education, and this is not a South African phenomenon. It's a world over phenomenon. It's a challenge that is affecting higher education all over. We actually have a policy in place whereby they stipulate that there should be increased participation rate in higher education, but that doesn't actually match the funding and also other challenges that are faced that are actually impacting on throughput. We have actually touched on that already this morning today, so I'm not going to actually dwell much on this. We actually have also another challenge of student attrition rates, which is the dropout rates in higher education. So I'm actually asking myself, the question that is it the problem of higher education really, or is the problem of the schooling sector? Because what is happening now in terms of the trend, if you look at it, you find that we get students from the schooling system who enter higher education, and they are actually not prepared. I was actually interested in finding out what could be the causes, and then how is higher education actually grappling with this problem. That's also linked to poor student success rates, which is a challenge that we're facing. Now, the CHE actually conducted a study where they looked at the students who are enrolled in the 3-year degree program. And they actually found out that only 29% of the students who enrolled in 2006 actually graduated, and this is a huge, huge, huge challenge. Colleagues, I just want to talk just a little bit on the National Plan for Higher Education, because I feel that we need to sometimes reflect on this. In 2001, there were targets that were set for higher education in terms of meeting, in terms of improving throughput. And because I was looking at the postgraduate program, that is the B.Ed honors in education, I was interested in finding out whether those particular institutions were actually meeting the targets that were set in the National Plan for Higher Education 2001. And as you can see, there I've just highlighted that for distance learning, they had to meet actually 30% of that. And is that what is really happening? So far, I couldn't find any information or any data from EMIS that actually shows that those targets are being set. Hence, I went about my research. My research question was, to what extent have universities succeeded in increasing their throughput and graduation trends to meet the targets set by the National Plan for Higher Education. And my sub-research questions were, what strategies were developed by the two institutions to improve the throughput rates in the programs? What were the trends in the throughput and retention rates in the B.Ed honors programs in the two institutions for the period 2001 to 2012? And lastly, did the strategies developed succeed in bringing the institutions closer to the benchmark set in the national plan? As I've already indicated, my rationale was to explore the phenomenon of student retention and throughput facing higher education with a view to investigate trends in attrition, retention, and graduation rates, to assess the effectiveness of strategies employed by higher education institutions to address student retention and throughput, to provide insights into best practice models based on success stories and lessons learned, and lastly, to contribute to theory development in student success, retention, and throughput. The methodology that I used was qualitative. I actually went about developing a multiple case study research design. I wanted to find out from the participants their views regarding their strategies. So it was an in-depth interviews that I actually did using content analysis and comparative analysis. The sampling was purposive, whereby I actually looked at the managers that are actually managing those particular programs, because they have the expertise for my in-depth interviews. And lastly, I did a document analysis whereby I looked at the policies, I looked at the institutional documents, I looked at the enrollments and graduation trends, and also I did observations, and well, of course, I took my notes. As I've already mentioned, it was in-depth interviews with subjects as expertise, the analysis of data using content analysis, transcribing of data for analysis, and then the use of secondary data. The theoretical framework that actually informed my study was the transactional distance theory by Michael George Moore, where he talks about the distance between the students and the lecturers as a big challenge. What actually motivated me, or what actually made me to actually use that particular theory, is because it speaks to the strategies that institutions can actually use to improve throughput. And in that theory actually talks to holistic approaches, integrated methods, and also techniques in terms of improvement, but I'll be talking to that later on. I also looked at the equivalency theory, which also informed me just in terms of the gaps that I found in the transactional distance, and I also looked at systems theory. As I've already indicated, that this theory actually looks at the strategies and the practice of teaching and learning in distance education. Michael George Moore actually talks to the separation, that is that there is a separation, there is a psychological and communication space to be crossed. So he actually says that students are, they have their own spaces, which is kind of distance from the lecturer. So there is that transactional gap that needs to be bridged in terms of distance learning. So I think this theory would actually help in terms of TUT to try to reach out to distance learners, because I've realized that that is some of the challenges that TUT is facing, because distant campuses actually don't have direct access to some of the learning activities in TUT quite easily. So it's a kind of a challenge. My research findings actually, I found that there were similarities in techniques used to address student retention and throughput, and the common approach that actually which is also consistent with the literature that these institutions used, was a holistic one, whereby they actually used blended learning techniques. They also used ICTs and student support. So it was a holistic approach whereby they made it a point that instead of only offering, tuition to students through, let's say, ICTs, because then there are some students who, for instance, would be in the rural areas who do not have access to technology. So they would actually organize, contact sessions. So that is exactly what we refer to when we say blended learning, because it's some part of the offering that is through ICTs and some that is through contact sessions. They also found out there was a need to actually to tailor the ODL model to students' academic needs. So this is a very important aspect. That's what I also realized, because then you really need to understand what are the academic needs of students to be able to give them the relevant support that they need. Understand student profiles, backgrounds, and IT profiles. So in terms of how they went about doing that, they actually conducted some research to find out the student profiles so that they could actually provide them with the support. But at the same time, there were some slight differences in approaches, because one institution actually would provide, for instance, CD-ROM and reading materials, whilst the other one actually used the whiteboard technology. So the themes that actually emerged across cases were student support systems, identification of at-risk students and providing them with the necessary support, blended learning using of ICTs and contact sessions, effective administrative support systems, quality assurance and benchmarking best practice. And basically this was I've already talked to that. And what I also found to be of use would be actually looking at the students in terms of their uniqueness, that is the uniqueness of the South African distance education context. Because, I mean, for instance, if we have to borrow models from overseas that are not really relevant to our context, that wouldn't really assist. So they actually, those institutions actually looked at their uniqueness, and they actually looked at how they could actually use support systems for students based on that. They also encountered internet access challenges, whereby you find that some students don't have actually access to the internet, and then they had to actually deal with that. And also they looked at the specific academic needs of students and support systems to bridge the transactional distance. This is how the models of the institutions are. And as you can see, they are directly linked to the theory, the transactional distance theory, whereby Michael George Moore talks about the application of various strategies and enhanced student-lecturer engagement, which is so important in the distance learning context. Well, based on my findings, these are my recommendations. Acknowledgement of success is evident in the theories and models on good practice. Application of other strategies supplementary to current techniques, including stretching funds. Tackling the challenge of dropping out of first-year students and retention strategies. Academic developed programs or foundation programs. Effective assessment and feedback mechanisms. Strategies to address limited access to internet, financial constraints, poor quality, and student support. The use of feasible, sustainable strategies aligned to meeting academic students' needs within local contexts. Effective program design aligned to institutional missions, vision, and objectives. Thank you very much.